Hi everyone, my name is Alyssa, and today I'm here with founder and teacher of Low Band Pi, my teacher, Luhan Matus. Thank you so much for the opportunity to sit with you and just honestly have an open conversation.
It's a pleasure to be here with you, Alyssa. You beautiful thing. She's beautiful, guys. Let's talk behind her back, okay? She's so lovely.
Thank you, Luhan. I don't have anything prepared, to be honest. A little more background on myself and my relationship to Luhan is that I first came upon another one of his students in 2019, but it wasn't until 2021 that I actually finally opened one of his books. And before even getting halfway through, it was The Power of Emptiness. I knew that I had to find him on the internet, and his website is parallelperception.com. And then after a brief search through his website, I also then knew I had to come see him in person and learn from him, learn the forms that are available, and went out to Sedona in 2021, and I think I took 5 courses that year, starting with gravity. But I'm back again, very happily retaking gravity again right now this summer, and it's been beautiful for me, and I feel very lucky. So that's just what I have to start with in terms of my relationship to Luhan.
Yeah, it's kind of nice that you're doing gravity, repeating gravity again. It's important to repeat the forms, but this is a very, very advanced form. So yeah. we'll be establishing the lines or the power lines and the relationship between the electric and magnetic principles that apply to the feet, the opening of the bones. So the gravity was a private practice of mine for many, many years, and then I opened it to the public and to my students. And just because it's the first form doesn't really mean it's preliminary. Everything in Low Band Pi is extremely advanced. But what I usually do is graduate people through the forms. And of late, I've decided to just give advanced material all the way through, consolidating everything that I've taught for the last 25 years. And I'm excited to release this information to the public. Yeah.
I'm happy. And even for me too, it's been amazing retaking the form. And I know because I had taken the form 2 years prior, and I've practiced the form, and then also in my own timeline, I maybe matured within my own journey, revisiting the form now as you're offering it as at the last level, the highest level of the form, I can feel and observe so much more depth that I couldn't find before, and at the same more power, but at the same time a lot more relaxation, which in turn helps me arrive at more depth within the form. And maybe you can speak to
okay.
that.
I think the main thing to reiterate and just make clear is that usually when people do the form, they do the form just to establish the full format of it, just so that you travel through all the movements, and you become familiar with it, and then I pop more complexity in later on. So when people come now, they may learn the advanced forms because they've been consolidated, and now that I'm getting ready to have teacher training programs, I've got to put all this material out for my teachers, so that they can be overwhelmingly educated in terms of the electric and magnetic potential within the hidden lights inside the body, or the power lines. So it's when people do gravity, I would really advise them just to go through the format and the whole framework of it without the intention of the electric and magnetic principle opening and closing the bones, or pulling the bones open, or spiraling the bones open, spiraling them, or pulling them open in a spiral in comparison to the feet. But I've got a few new people learning gravity at the moment. There's about 5, and I will advise them just to take consideration, just to learn the form first, so they can concentrate on the proper, the correct structural alignment, and then go into the activating the electromagnetic field in terms of where the placement of the power lines are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And maybe when I say more depth, I can't say for certain at all that I'm experiencing this or that, other than I know I'm just not trying as hard as I used to. Like I can just practice the structure, getting to know how the form feels without having so much tension of mental effort or physical effort. And for me, that's a pretty big new thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, usually when the form starts, when you first learn it, then you learn to relax into it. So there's a relaxed format to it, so that the body can consolidate its downward journey towards the lower dantian and into the ground. But as you'll discover on Saturday, is that there's a principle of wrapping steel in cotton. Now, whenever you understand wrapping steel in cotton, or you pull your joints open like this is called iron wire. So even if I do this, it looks very, very soft, but I've got a kinetic hand here and pull on those particular lines, which pulls the joints open. So even when you're throwing silk and pushing, there's a certain tension lines inside of the body that have to be graduated into to understand how to open and close the bones to cause the electromagnetic field to become voluminous within the power lines. So as you go through the next level of gravity, you'll discover that your relaxation is very, very important to understand how the fascial lines drop. But you'll also discover that these particular lines of pulling the joints open and pushing the joints open are very, very important to compress and open the Ming Men and compress the lower dantian, so that you have a floating sensational palm. And when we do this, you'll discover that whatever ailed you before will start to become energized. So you'll have way more energy. The form will take virtually the same amount of time, but the emphasis in it is in the field of iron wire principle, and also the cotton or steel wrapped in cotton. So you become hard like steel, yet your movements look very, very soft. So this causes in conjunction with gravity, with windlock, this causes the body to be like an iron bell, or have a very, very strong elastic field around the musculature, so it can't be penetrated. So, and this also has to do with an external focus too, so that the body can be engaged in a form of expansion that is not contrived from the mind, but if you could imagine that the emptiness around you becomes so complete that you disappear from your own point of reference. And if you don't have your own point of reference, and you've got this floating sensation that nobody can find your inner core or your grounding. So so in a lot of cases it'll feel like when somebody bumps into me, or we're doing something in the office, they'll feel like they're bumped into a hard tree, but it's not that there's hardness there. It's just that there's very, very difficult for the other person's capability to penetrate has been delivered a very, very strange blow, so that so that they don't really encounter where my grounding is, and their whole mental sphere is dislodged. But when you begin to understand this type of perception, it's easy to touch on someone's fascia, and then they leave their body for a split second, and that split second is when the internal process, or the trick of the internal process, is applied.
One kind of question that came up when you were speaking earlier about doing the form and time, I don't know if this is relevant to what you said, but I have noticed that, let's say in the morning, I wake up, and whether or not I've sat for meditation prior to the practice, sometimes I'll still notice the mental activity is very active, or the emotional activity is very active, and there is a level of sometimes resistance to doing the form. And it could be as simple as, oh, I'm tired, or I'm hungry, or tiny little things like that.
Or your spiritual growth has been related to sitting on the couch.
Yeah, or something. I don't know. Or there's just like a sleepiness to break through. But then once I actually make that choice and start the practice, for example, the past 2 weeks since we did the first session for gravity for the summer, I've been doing the practice daily. And so once I actually get into the preliminary movements of gravity, it's immediate that it just starts to empty. Everything just starts to empty, and I can just lose myself into the form, basically. But I'm not lost, I'm completely there, and be integrated into the form. And then my perception of time basically goes out the window. Like, I don't know how long I've been practicing for, but I also don't care. I know my body is being worked quite intensively, especially because once I actually sit down, my legs are throbbing, my knees are throbbing. But when I'm actually in the form, when I can feel even minute sensations of floating, or sensations of being pulled down, of the gravity of my body being anchored or pulled into the earth, that is it feels so at home for my body that I stop caring to a point, till it really, really hurts, and then I have to get out of the posture. But I don't know if that is anything.
Yeah, that's good. The ground force is basically the ground force and the heavenly force. There are two main forces that we're working with in terms of the bows inside the body. Now, the bows inside the body, when you have a ground force posture, the ground force posture will rebound you back into the ground, and as you get pulled into the ground, this gives the experience of what is going to happen when your body is taken away from you when you die. When you have the heavenly force, or the vacuous force, which is related to pung, or floating, or the vacuous nature of our body, then this is connected to the energy body, to the astral body, to the water body, which is the double. And when this double leaves the body, there is the body immediately becomes heavy, and the double leaves. And this is you're gaining familiarity with what's going to occur when you die. So these two forces you have to become very, very familiar with, because when the earth reclaims your body back to the earth, then your spirit body then ascends and becomes a duplicate of yourself, which then starts to traverse other very, very subtle realms of perception in terms of going into Bardo. Now, these subtle realms of consciousness are experienced through the heavenly process and through the earthly process of the bows that you pull, so you can become familiar with these states and become totally aware of what's going on when you do die, so that you can be as calm as possible. So it's yeah, and there may be more experiences that you have in terms of what occurs when you're sleeping as well. There are two phases within your consciousness when you go to sleep, and there's another phase of consciousness when you wake up. And we've spoken about this before in terms of what occurs when you go to sleep. What do you need to do with the focus of your eyes, your ears, and your feeling perception in terms of falling into your body into a state of emptiness. Now, you know that when you're doing certain postures in gravity, you have to do it so slow that it becomes you feel like you're moving through warm honey, or you're moving through quicksand, and also you're moving so slow that you have a hydraulic feeling beginning to manifest inside of your physical form, so that when you do sink down with this hydraulic feeling, then you have a vacuous feeling rising, and when you rise, then you have this hydraulic feeling of sinking inside of your body. So you become aware of two forces. One rises as you sink, and when you sink, one rises, as you experience in your practice. Now, when this occurs, you become familiar with the oscillation of these particular states. So when you're looking at this familiarity with being grounded and simultaneously being vacuous, and simultaneously being grounded, is very, very important for one's perception. Now, so to further establish an understanding in terms of what we need to do with our mind, in terms of the resistances of the mind will then be captured within the resistances of the body. So in the last interview, I was speaking about crafts in terms of when somebody becomes very voluminous and very open in Lo-Ban-Pai, they become sensitive to the focus of other people. So it's really, really important to understand that you need to be really grounded, full of a lot of feelings of compassionate recognition of the other person, because if you do this without being attached to the emotional impulse that you have when somebody does something negative, it doesn't fly into your body and causes a location in your body to be anchored into that feeling. And as it's anchored into that feeling, you have an entanglement of your mind with that particular feeling. So then we've got to look at another way of discovering what we need to do with the process of our empty mind, which must be infused with the vacuous element. Now, when we go to bed at night, we all know that when we go to fall asleep, if there's any drama in our life, then the drama will be amplified by going into sleep with the drama. If there's a feeling of physical illness, then the drama of that particular physical illness will be amplified as you're going to sleep. So what we've really got to do is when we go to sleep is when we go to sleep and we find ourselves going to a situation which isn't quite positive, a feeling which isn't quite positive, a narrative which we're running in our mind which isn't positive. The scenarios of non-resolve become amplified because the person is unstable, because their life hasn't found perfect harmony. So if the life doesn't find perfect harmony, then what you've got to do is just before you go to sleep, that you watch your eyes, you watch your feeling, you watch your listening capacity, because you'll review everything that's said, everything you've seen, everything you've felt. And as you go into sleep, as you're dropping into sleep, that you've got to have the discipline not to go to sleep with these feelings, because they'll be amplified as you go to sleep. And the reason that they're amplified is because the notion of thought, the notion of feeling, and the notion of unresolved issues are automatically amplified before you go there. So they become very, very strong in terms of the determination of the water body and the mind coalescing into a point to remind you that you need to resolve something, But reminding you to resolve something is only amplifying that. It's not resolving it at all. So when somebody goes to sleep, it's just like when they go to do their practice. They go into a brainwave pattern which correlates to a sleeping pattern. So when you go into the sleeping pattern and you then time is lost. the feelings of drama is lost, the feelings of anger is lost, the feeling of grief is lost. You go into these refined feelings, and as you drop through your fascia, your fascia will locate the area that is bound by resistance, and it will flow through that resistant point, whether it's muscular or whether it's caught in the fascial web. And as this occurs, as you drop into that, you look for the feeling of what happens with the fascial reflex, and the fascial reflex reflects back to you that what you're watching is an empty placement of your energy body in terms of resolving those particular feelings. This is why La Bang Pai works so well in terms of resolving the feelings that you can't quite get to the point of resolving them in life. You resolve them inside of your body, and then when you're resolved, you end up with a clear capacity to speak of what needs to be looked at, either with your partner, with your business partner, with your circumstances, or you understand that it can't be resolved in circumstances that are a little bit distant from you. In our personal relationship, we have to look at this very clearly, but in relationships with people outside of our general vicinity, in terms of not in our family, not close quarter, but they're a person that you can observe but you can't really speak to, because there'll be ramifications. So if there are ramifications, even if you don't speak to this person, and you're sensitive enough to actually read the microgestures, these microgestures then are resolved in movement. But if they're resolved in movement and you reactivate through your mind the feelings that you experienced before, and it becomes amplified once again, then before you go to sleep, the most important thing is you go to sleep with a feeling of love, a feeling of comfort, a feeling of being embraced by your partner. This is a very, very important thing to realize, because before you go to sleep, if you have an internal dialogue, if you have an internal feeling that relates to an internal dialogue, if you have a mental process that follows this, you're listening to what's being said, you're looking at what happened, and you're totally infused with this feeling, then it's just like going into dreaming with the task of dreaming, but you're going into your dreaming state with an unresolved mechanism, which then it's like commanding yourself to dream with the amplified feelings of your negativity. Yeah, that's why I always say don't try to go into dreaming until you resolve the emotional ebbs and flows, the mental ebbs and flows, the auditory memory, the visual memory. This has got to be all solved, so that when you go to sleep, you're falling into sleep. Like when you're doing La Bang Pai, you automatically go into these states, and those feelings are resolved immediately. And then, like you said before, you were doing your practice, you didn't know whether you could do it because your body knows you're going to resolve those things which have been amplified inside of you. And are we attached to those amplified feelings? And if you're attached to the amplified feelings, then the cat becomes a pretty friendly character for you, you know? Oh, I love my couch, it's so comfortable. But anyway, so once you do this and you do your practice, then automatically you've assigned your attention to discipline, and the discipline of your practice then brings you into a state of resolved compassion for your circumstances, and then you have the viable reasoning to actually speak to your circumstances with clarity. But when you go to bed, if you go to bed with the hearing what was being said, seeing the whole content of what occurred, and then your feeling capacity is amplified, your listening capacity is amplified into this, you're actually commanding this to be amplified in your dreams. And the most people say, well, I want to be a dreamer and everything like this. I said, resolve your life first, turn your internal dialogue off, shut the entanglement of your mind off toward the issue inside of your body before you even try to do this, because your entanglements haven't been sorted out. So people want to rush for this type of experience, but what they're doing is rushing to take their daily life into their dreaming scene, and they say, well, I want to try and be lucid within my dreams without resolving the lucidity of their own life. Yeah, this is the reason why I said I dream. So that now we'll just go into this before I go into something else in terms of visionary states and how dreaming is actually accomplished. in terms of a visionary state. And this is very, very complex. We do this in Golden Lotus. The practice of this is taught in Golden Lotus, so we'll talk about that in a second, but we'll go through first. Now, so sorry guys, I'm always touching my nose because I've got hay fever here. There's so many pollens around at the moment. So if you see me sniffing and touching my nose, it's because of that. But anyway, so when you fall asleep and you have a beautiful, compassionate partner, and you're falling into sleep, and you sit up and you say, no, I'm not going to go and amplify that. I need to amplify emptiness. If you can't go into emptiness and amplify your emptiness, and when you amplify your emptiness, you go into a very, very voluminous neutral state. And this voluminous neutral state will then deliver the capacity for your body to sink and to rise simultaneously. And we're going to talk about this in a second, because your absolute duplicate of your double can get out of bed and stand on the end of the bed, and I'll describe what happened in terms of this with my wife. It frightened the hell out of her, but she's seen it a dozen times. But because it happened in this particular fashion, she was totally shocked, because she'd never seen this occurs so frequently. We'll explain that in a second, but that's a little teaser to keep everybody on. Now, so if you can't go into sleep with this resolved feeling, then you ask your partner, spoon me, just give me your love and give me the support of your energy field. And when you go to bed, a male and female, when they go to bed, the first thing that occurs is the energy bubble expands into the energy bubble of the other person. When you're with another person, all your genes, your proteins, all your DNA is in the bed. So you're both expanding into each other as two voluminous bubbles of energy. So when this occurs, you're nurturing each other with this voluminous energy, especially women towards men. Now, I'll talk about something. This is very interesting. So it's very, very important for a couple to have a very, very harmonious, loving, understanding relationship, because in general, if you look at society in general, women, they get to a certain point, and the man is out to work and everything like this, but he doesn't build a friendly relationship with his wife. So then, as they're growing, the wife gets more and more estranged, and they end up sleeping in different rooms, different beds, everything like this. So when the man retires, he dies earlier because they don't sleep in the same room. They don't have this voluminous energy, this very, very subtle communication. And the man needs the energy of his wife to expand into each other, to become enriched and energetically pushed forward to the end of their life with love and devotion, and with compassion and understanding, and with such communion, that friendship just becomes such a volume of loving attention that it's unbelievable. This is very rarely happening in our society. I'm very lucky I've got it with my wife. But so when you go to bed, I hope I'm making sense. When you go to bed, you if you can't shut off your internal dialogue, if you've got an emotional ebb and flow, if you visually can't escape the scene that you've been engaged in, if you can't if you can't turn off your internal dialogue, which has been activated because you're going to sleep, instead of amplifying that, which means that if you amplify that, you're going into a state with that amplified, not emptiness. Yeah. So the first thing you need to do is to ask your partner, can you please give me a hug? Let us expand into each other within the communion of our relationship. And this is very, very healing. So when this occurs, then you forget where you're focused, and your body will go to the attention of the person who's holding you. This is union. This is what marriage is a union of male and female in terms of becoming one single being that's not separated by male or female, one single being communing together to become not a force to reckon with, but a force that gives credence to the fact that the energy that you develop during life will be the energy that will sustain you in your transition. So So that when you do this, you may not pop into emptiness, but you may pop into a security feeling that will allow you not to focus on the amplified feelings which you're trying to escape from. So when you get to the point where you have these amplified feelings under control, you're going to sleep, and you slowly transition, and you know your partner cares for you, and you go into a state of emptiness. So then the emptiness is amplified instead of talk, visualization, and feeling. So when this becomes amplified, and you get used to amplifying the emptiness, then you go into a dreamless state, and a state where you quite frankly are quite aware, but you're unaware simultaneously. This is hard to comprehend. So then when you wake up in the morning, the first thing that happens when you wake up in the morning, you either have an amplified feeling of the memory of what you amplified when you went to sleep in terms of deranged dreams, or deranged visions, or deranged feelings, or you just wake up, you just don't know where you were. You forget that you woke up in a state of silence because you didn't amplify that silence before you went to bed. So you all of a sudden wake up and you go, okay, where was I? What was I doing? How come I can't represent this eternal emptiness inside of me? Yeah, because you need to practice it before you go to bed, and then you need to be aware. Okay, have I got any residual feeling inside of me? So you know the old saying, put your right foot forward and get on with life. You ever heard that? Yeah. So when you get out of bed, as soon as you get out of bed, if you've got unresolved feelings, put your left foot down first. This will drain all your negative energy into the ground. So if you've got unresolved feelings, let it drain into the ground, because you don't want to amplify that and continue that to the next day, because that's a waste of your time, because that needs to be emptied so you can be clear. Because the emotional ebbs and flows draw people into the drama that you need to be released from, which connect to the mind, which connect to your listening power, which connect to the other person. Then you may amplify these points of reference inside of each other, and this amplification will never end. So you put your left foot down, you forgive the person. Today's anew. It's a new life. It's a new incarnation. You've just traveled through Bardo, and when you wake up, where was I? Just like you wake up in a newborn baby, you cry your eyes out because where am I?
Yeah.
But you don't know where you are. You have no memories, and that's virtually what happens when we go through our death cycle and we return back. We don't have memories because in life we didn't practice to focus on the empty point before we transition, and we focus on the empty point before we gain the transition of waking up the next day. So then we're practicing to die and be reborn every single day of our life. Now, if the amplification is on emptiness, then the emptiness itself is, you feel like, I feel renewed, nothing there, put your right foot down, get on with your life. Yeah, very interesting. And put your right foot forward and get going. So when you look at this, it's very, very obvious that we take the nightmare of our life into our amplification of transition into emptiness. But if we don't have emptiness, then we're put into dreams, and these dreams are exactly what we're going to see when we die. There will be an amplification of what wasn't dealt with in Bardo. As you go through that transitional point, everything which has been held vibratorily or energetically in your heart will be revealed to you, and then you'll be tested at that particular point, the same way you're tested every day before you go to sleep. The very, very same way you're tested to actually wake up and be clear. But if you can't wake up and be clear in Bardo, you'll be held back because your unresolved feelings into an unresolved circumstance which you didn't really choose, because it chooses it for you because you didn't do the right thing in your life. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't mean that somebody that you've offended is going to be traveling and having another experience with you in your next lifetime. It's not like that. It's not so simple like this. This is kind of naive. You go back in without the awareness of what you need to do next, and you have maybe a grain of sand of what you need to do as a child, but that's very, very quickly destroyed via the new circumstances you're in. And those new circumstances create another revolution or another cycle of karmic response, because it's very, very difficult to hold on to the empty point of the joy of a child without it being destroyed before you become into your prepubescence and becoming into a teenager. As soon as your hormones kick in, then the karmic results then start again with a new circumstance. And the only thing I can say that you will inherit from your parents a genetic predisposition, obviously, but you won't have the genetic predisposition of the person that you were the previous lifetime in terms of the body you were in. But the only things that will be relevant to you in terms of what's in your astral body, your energy body, or your water body, will be the fact that you are unresolved, but you have a chance while you're clear and in a state of purity where your joy is voluminous, that you can start again properly. But because we didn't understand this before we went to sleep and before we woke up, because as we're born, we just woke up. So what do we have when we just wake up? What occurs when we're a child is an endless resistance to negativity and endless joy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are we doing when we go to bed tonight? Give me a hug. Give me some feeling of security. As you get that feeling of security, you start to transition into joy, and you go, "I'm safe," and then you transition into a state which amplifies the emptiness of transition, and then you wake up. And as you wake up and you get used to these particular, you wake up with a feeling of resolve because you're safe. It's different when you go into Bardo, though, because that will be tested to such a degree that it's unbelievable. So we've got to practice this on a daily basis, all of our life, to actually practice transitioning. And the reason for the internal arts, from a spiritual perspective, not from activating jinn or activating anything that is a fighting principle. The only thing that's of pertinence is to open up the variability of frequency that we haven't touched upon, so that we can evolve and become clear. But we have to find the subtleties of those frequencies. And if we've got some predisposition which holds us back, which ties us to a circumstance which may be negative, how can we find those subtle frequencies? Then the couch will hold you. Then the couch will say, "Oh, you're more comfortable sitting on me. Why do you need to do your practice?" That is because you're held in either an area inside of your body which has a resistance point. "Oh, I didn't get enough sleep. Oh, I'm feeling ill. Or I caught this and I caught that. Or I caught this illness and this feeling from the people I'm interacting with." So then, because it's unresolved, your head's going like this. So when this occurs, it's really important to understand that every single day of our life is we die, we get reborn, we go into a state of emptiness, we come back, we die. Every single day, we're reborn every single day, and we've got to be so aware and so thankful that we're practicing to be in a state that is irreversible, that is inevitable. We're going to die. Everybody dies.
Right.
But we've got to try and keep our awareness to such a point that death is something that we learn to transition into via our daily practices, via the fact of going to sleep and via the fact of waking up. And then going into our practices and practicing the alternate frequencies that we're meant to become aware of in terms of what are we missing? Why can't we find these beautiful frequencies, these heightened states of frequencies? Because the lowest state of emotional discord, which is caught in the energy body or the fascial web, caught in the physical form, and also entangled with the mind, because the mind basically has to be free of this, and the only way it can be free of this is to put your mind into movement, and your mind becomes empty, and then the alchemy of Feng Shui then settles this frequency deep inside the body through the fascial reflex or the fascial bows to go to a power point, and this power point then drips and drips and drips very, very slowly into the center of one's matrix, and then we become voluminous with that type of information in terms of our own personal growth, supporting us through our internal process, internal realizations, because we're not captured in an old paradigm. Mm-hmm. We're grateful to be captured in the paradigm of realizing where we need to go next. All of our blood cells are unified, but separate entities which work together in cooperation. and that's what we need to do in humanity, is to realize that we're one body, everybody's a single cell, and everybody needs to be constructively together for the future. Nothing negative. Yeah, that's what we've got to evolve into.
Right. What I wanted to share is along the lines of both of those things, which is in terms of my personal experience of being sensitive or being aware of what maybe someone else thinks is a micro gesture, but is very clearly a macro gesture for me, and the reverberations that can create in my body, or that like it's like a torquing, like a, you know, and in terms of what I know I have to do for myself every moment that I'm awake or conscious of being awake is like a constant emptying, of not taking things personally, of not being like a solid steel veneer or drum or wall that something reverberates into, but kind of disappearing so that things can flow through me, or I can meld into the reverberations itself, and to not identify with this person who is maybe feeling attacked or looked down upon, or whatever, this or that negative thing.
Now, when you look at The Power of Antidote and also Whispering of the Dragon and Who Am I, these three books deal with what you just said, but as you say, something comes in and reverberates inside of you just like a drum. Now, if you play the music of a drum, and you're not taking it personally, because the vibration or the emphasis of that drum bouncing in and out of you shows you that you're not attached to it, because you're not taking it personally. Yeah. But the thing is, we've all got to be aware that something has to be taken into consideration if you feel it.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely have to do that. You definitely have to recognize what's in front of you, because we're basically infused into our environment as the hunters of the woods. You know, so if you go into the woods, you wouldn't say to yourself, well, I don't want to feel this, and I don't want to feel that. I don't want to feel a bear coming. I don't want to realize there's a snake there. I don't want to realize that there's something of danger there. No, you'll turn yourself off completely and become aware of a bear, become aware of a tiger, become aware of a snake, because your familiarity with the environment is so heightened, because you need to protect yourself, but you don't take that personally.
Right.
Yeah. But the thing is, as householders, we take things personally because our environment, or the forest or the woods, are people. And as we walk through these woods, walk through this forest, or this very, very complex situation, we're going to get enormous amounts of information, and we've got to navigate that with, is that dangerous or is that safe? Is that neutral, or is that negative, or is that positive? We've got to look at everything with the nuance of what we've realized, and take into total consideration what are we meant to realize, and how are we meant to process this in terms of our own wisdom. Now, if somebody is mean, or someone's disruptive, then you automatically you will put it inside your body, because maybe you care about that person, or you're in close proximity to that person, and they will try to engineer a particular alignment or entanglement with you to certify that they've had an effect on you, or they've got control over you. Yeah, you understand this? Yeah. So if you understand this, then the only way to really resolve these types of circumstances is try to dissolve the feeling, which this entanglement is karma.
Mm-hmm.
It is a feeling which gets amplified and amplifies more and more as it's unresolved. Or you can sit back and say, well, I've got to deal with this, and I need to understand very, very deeply what's occurring, because my drum, the feelings come into my drum, it bang, bang, bang inside of me, and then as it bang, bang, bang inside of you, as it ricochets, you become aware of the ramifications of the intention coming upon you. Yeah. And if you've got feelings inside of you that are unresolved, as it ricochets inside of you, it may ricochet onto a feeling you've already got, a feeling that hasn't been emptied. So this particular feeling will then amplify that with the feeling that you haven't resolved. So then the work is to not do yourself first, and then attempt not to do somebody else, so you can empty your feelings of reception inside of you and make that clear. So you can understand it's not you bouncing back on the reverberation, it's the person bouncing in on your emptiness, and then in the refinement bounces back through your open-hearted voice or actions. If you can speak, you speak. If you can't speak, you act. But if you discover you've been caught inside, then this entanglement has to be looked at very, very carefully. So this entanglement can be emptied through your practice, as you've realized. So the practice of Lobanpai is sacred as far as I'm concerned, because immediately you can empty yourself, and then you go back to your circumstances, and you slowly, like if you let me say you're in a tube, and you're in a tubular glass container. When you breathe, what's going to happen? Your experiences will expand onto the edge of the glass, and then slowly drip back to the centralized, like with a what do you call it, like an hourglass. If you've got an hourglass, it goes to the central point and then spreads through your whole body. So if you realize that when you absorb something, it goes to your energy bubble and then it's reflected back to you via mist, the alchemy of that has to be looked at very, very carefully, because the mist itself is the experience of the other person manifesting as an entanglement. So then if you go into a not doing and you do your practice, then as you go through your practice and you do all your movements, then this mist then is alchemized into a more refined state into your being. And then the reflective mechanism of that is not entanglement. It's a form of expression that understands there's a higher vibration in comparison to what's captured you as the reverberation inside of you. So, am I going too far? Do you understand?
I think so.
Yeah. So this is an alchemical process. So the alchemical process is to basically realize that you're being challenged at that particular point, and the challenge is an obstacle. And if you can't overcome that obstacle, you take it to your sleep, it'll be amplified. You take it to your death, whoa, it's going to be so amplified if you didn't deal with it in life. So that's why it's very, very important that marriage, that friendship, that true companionship by other people is sacred. If it's not sacred, there's something wrong. So as a humanity, we've forgotten that there is a sacredness in communication, because if it's not sacred, it becomes something else and other than what it should be. And then we're dealing with a non-sacred state, a non-viability of this non-sacred state then becomes locked into dysfunctional emotion, and then you have a dysfunctional mind, which will then, like the thief, it's a thief. It'll steal everything intellectually and justify itself, and then the ghost of that particular mental attitude will become the ghost of a malformed feeling, which is projected as justification.
All right.
So if we, I got a smile out of you there. So if you look at it like this, then the formula of life is actually the formula of life and death while we're living.
Right.
If we understand this, then your trials and tribulations are the test of your life. You don't want these trials and tribulations to be the test that confront you when you die.
Right.
Because you know what you need to deal with while you're living. And this will help resolve the dilemma of the fear of dying, because the life situation, or the obstacle in life, are testing you with the karmic results of everything you've done in this lifetime. And when you get to Bardo, that's when you'll be tested again. And if you can't control this or come to terms with it, something. Did you hear a bit? So if you don't come to terms with it, then Bardo will amplify your clarity of the things that should have been cleared. So if you have an amplification of the things that should have been cleared, then that amplification is going to be a nightmare.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't actually deal with not having resolve or forgiveness within myself.
Yeah.
Even if I struggle with it for a day, and I know some part of me is maybe not totally 100% clear of it before sleep. I know usually inside of myself, I'll clear it by the next day, or just as soon as possible, because it just feels terrible to carry any kind of resentment or judgment or anything self-protective. Not in terms of the practical level of self-protection where, okay, maybe you can't speak to somebody and you know that and you keep your distance, but self-protection in terms of dialogue, mental dialogue that, maybe we've been socially trained to think is self-protective, but it's actually self-harmful.
Self-harmful.
Yeah.
So it's even when I'm listening to the noise in the background of this recording, it sounds like wood burning in a fire. Can you hear it?
It started raining here.
Oh,
I don't know.
That's what it is.
It's tapping on the window.
Oh, that's lovely.
It's really nice.
So that's dragon's tears. That means resolve and means cleansing. But it sounded like wood burning to me, which is still the same principle. Is that the wood element has to be cleared so that your liver can be freed and your gallbladder can express without having resentment.
Right.
So that's just the way it is. And Lobanpai is very watery in its practice. So this is very beautiful. And you're right.
Yes.
It's not good to have negative emotions, but once you discover negativity, then that's a test of your character.
Right.
Yeah. So you put the better parts of yourself on your perception. If you can't talk to someone, you can act in accordance to your own nature without them seeing it. Or if you can talk to someone, you still act within accordance of your nature, but this is transferred to your voice without reference to unresolved feelings.
Right.
In Lobanpai, everyone gets empty enough to actually receive somebody. So you destroy. There's a destructive cycle in Lobanpai. You destroy your anger, you destroy your jealousy, you destroy your elements of dysfunction. You destroy your lust, and it becomes pure love. So you destroy everything that's not meant to be there, and then all these placements, all these compartments inside of you, then become a soundboard for somebody to come in, and then that's not you. That's the other person.
Right.
As it's the other person, then you have a realization, or you have the capacity to speak from your emptiness through your throat. Which from the Indian perspective, it's the trachea is the strongest state of emptiness that can ever be obtained, or the trachea, or the stillness of a lizard. So the trachea is where your heart finds the most still point to resolve the circumstances through this particular process. So that when you sit in stillness, the trachea becomes active. And as your trachea becomes active, your breath becomes slower. So then instead of having 20 breaths per minute, your comprehension will go from 20 breaths. I have 5.5 breaths to 6 breaths if I'm walking per minute. So as your breath gets slower and slower, your comprehension becomes more and more voluminous, because you're becoming calmer and calmer and calmer. As you become calmer, then as you become calmer.
Calmer.
As you become
calmer chameleon.
Calmer. Yeah, calmer. Yeah. Stillness of a lizard. Yeah. So as you become calmer. Ooh, that's very interesting. Word association. As you become calmer, you begin to realize that you're being communicated with by other entities of alternate phylums, like plants and everything like this. So then once you become infused in the environment like this, then you begin to listen and look and feel and see exactly the same way to immobile beings feel. They're rooted to the ground. They can't run away from you.
Right.
Yeah. So aren't we rooted beings that can't run away from our circumstances?
Right.
But we have the idea we can run away, but we're still rooted in the ground. We're still connected to the heavens, and we're still animated by our heart process. But when you look at a plant, they say, well, yeah, heaven, earth. That's fair. Where's their heart process? Because it doesn't have a beating heart doesn't mean the plant doesn't feel your beating heart in the resonant field of your perception. And that's what we've got to come to terms with, that these other beings are very, very intelligent in comparison to us. But they're sitting immobile, not being able to rip them out and burn them. The bottom lip came out there, dear.
I know, I felt sad because I love plants.
Yeah, so do I. I think they're so nurturing and beautiful. There were many, many years where I designed a garden and I sat in the garden for hours just gazing at the plants. Very, very beautiful, very, very calming. Everyone's saying, "What's he doing out there?" I made a fish pond. There were fish and a waterfall in the fish pond. I'll sit there for hours and just enjoy it. And everyone, "What's he doing?" I'm actually gazing into the beauty of our existence, of eternity.
And also, as human beings, we're also inescapable from each other. And I think that that's something that keeps coming up for me, that I want to share when I notice there's an opportunity to share that. Because I think, especially at this point in time, it's very easy for people to feel alone. Or it's very, people are kind of, thus far for the most part, being trained to maybe objectify another person or objectify themselves, or if they have discord or misunderstanding, or they just don't agree with another person, they might think that, I'll just, if they're married, I'll just get a divorce, or I'll just unfriend this person, or I'll just ignore this person, or I'll just move to the opposite side of the planet as this person, or maybe they gossip, to basically try to elevate themselves in position in comparison to that person, and by doing that think that they're somewhere else, and set up their circumstances and the people around them to support that. But the truth is that this is one thing I said recently on the topic of marriage and divorce, is the truth is that we're all married to each other. We're all inescapable from each other, and on paper maybe you can get divorced, or you can try to convince yourself that somebody who seems totally different from you has nothing to do with you, but it's not true.
There are also contradictions inside of yourself there in terms of your explanation. There are people that you shouldn't be around, that you know that you can't fit with. So if you can't fit with, don't waste your time.
That's also true. Yes,
that's really, really true, because you have to divorce yourself from circumstances in a lot of cases that you can see that maybe discord, which causes entanglement. That entanglement is going off the track of where you're meant to progress. So you've got to be very careful and discern the value of somebody that's in close quarter range to you to rearrange your life path in a way which isn't progressive. So you have to be very, very careful with this, because it is true that if you have a dog that bites you, and you give it kindness and never changes it, and then it kills the child or bites someone very, very badly, it's got to be put down. So this is very harsh what I'm saying, but let me go further with this. Our world is coveted by light. The only way I can see you is because the light hits your being and reflects back to me that you're there. So when you look at this, we're a production of light. We're light beings, but we represent that light through physical form and through the magnetic field. The magnetic field, then that resistance or that gravity gives the impression that we're solidified into this reality in physical form, but we're light beings. But because we don't really understand that we're light beings, we get caught in the drama of being with someone who's maybe not in accordance with your evolutionary process. You've got to be very, very careful not to be caught in 20 or 30 years of drama where that you lose your progress. in that 20 or 30 years, you can't get to a higher frequency because you're locked in lower frequencies, and not being damning of situations,
Right,
but you've got to be realistic too.
Be honest.
Be honest, yeah.
Right.
So if you know, I'm very, very fortunate to have a beautiful wife. Very, 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 very fortunate to have beautiful friends. You're one of my beautiful friends. You know, my beautiful students. This is so overwhelmingly sweet and genuine for me to actually have the reflection of my own light being reflected by the light of other people. So then I know that I'm meant to be with you. But if I'm with somebody who wants to attack me and can't see me because their life path is lower, then in terms of not really understanding and then soundboarding their dilemma upon my being and not seeing that there is a way to resolve this by not having contact. Because if you get caught in this, then how much of your life is going to be drained into that? So you have to be very discerning.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
with close quarter relationships. And I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about in general.
In general,
Don't
yes.
take this personally in any way whatsoever. So when you're in a close quarter relationship with someone, if you've got somebody that lives next door to you that's disruptive, then you know that you can only give them a certain amount of yourself, because they can't see into your field of energy, but they'll add themselves in terms of their agenda. They don't really see that they're enforcing something upon your being, and you retract from them, but they don't see you retracting. They become more and more strong because of your retraction. They feel like their dominance is working, but they don't see the retraction because their behavior is offensive. Do you understand? So that retraction is very, very important to realize. And as someone advances on your retraction, you go, oh, they really don't understand what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Right.
I've got a next door neighbor like this. Right here. So then I decided to be absolutely loving to him and make sure that he felt secure, because it wasn't right to put him in a place of imprisonment of my own feelings and my own realizations of him. Even though he's imprisoning me, I just let it go. But then there's only a certain amount of compliance will come from my body in terms of being invited to his place. I won't go there.
Right. Because
it's just an entrapment, because it's a control thing. So I won't go into his place even though he invites me. And I don't want to be there because there's a true agenda there, and I don't want to be part of that agenda because it's got nothing to do with him realizing me. It's only got to do with him wanting his what do you say, his feelings of domination to weaken me, to be under his control by saying, come and visit, do this, do that, do that. I don't want to. There's a certain boundary there. If I break that boundary, there'll be a cost to pay. Yeah. So I keep the boundary there, but I'm very, very kind to him. But I know that I can't let him go any further into my life, because my practice is 5.5 to 6 hours in the morning, and then I teach. So I can't have anything diverting me away from my path in terms of going into a socialized situation of control. So there are times and places for things, but there are times and places that you should never be involved in, because you know it's going to destroy your discipline.
Right.
It's like when someone gives up drinking and their friends say, "You've given up drinking," and they say, "Can we come visit?" They bring a 6-pack with them.
Right.
They know exactly what they're doing.
Right. Yeah. For me, it touches upon just the practical aspect of being in a body or having a body.
Yeah.
You know, we need to do certain things to take care of the body, and an extension of that is taking care of, you know, our energy and everything else that goes with it. So
yeah.
And at the same time too, just holding both the entire pole, both ends of the pole at any given moment. So at the same moment when I'm totally accepting of what I know that I felt, what I know that I saw, and what I know I received, I hold the possibility of what else could be. And then in the middle, I have to hold forgiveness. Otherwise I also can't move forward, because I'll be trapping myself in an emotion that I didn't create, I don't want to be in, basically.
Yeah.
That could be, it could be a temporary response that is appropriate, and then I need to let it go to go forward, but also be cautious, like you said, and not choose to be naive, basically.
Well,
and think that naivety is compassion.
Yeah, that's right. So naivety can be, I'm going to pick up that rattlesnake, not knowing the consequences of picking up the rattlesnake. If you know the consequences of picking up a rattlesnake and it bites you, then you can't take it personally because you picked it up.
Right.
But you can see situations can be like a wild animal. You don't touch it because it's going to disturb your field of perception in terms of its habitual habits are very, very clear to see, and the parameters of those habitual habits can't define you. So you have to move away and give the rattlesnake, the bear, the tiger, the lion, the coyote room to move. So it will be something you could witness without being involved in, because you go up to a coyote, it's not going to let you get near it because it knows that we're dangerous toward it, or it has boundaries. We may need to do exactly the same thing in terms of reverse engineering this. But if we become available to a leopard, if the leopard's hungry, we're done. So we've really got to see the dangers and then decide that we don't want to be involved in those dangers and not take it personally. Because taking it personally is where the leopard has already started devouring you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as long as you understand that the leopard can be represented by circumstances that begin to devalue you in a way which is has its equivalent in the wild in comparison to being socialized. There is a certain amount of untamed response from the environment, which is just like a wild environment. So you can look at the human beings like the wild west. If you put somebody into a situation where there are no rules or regulations, and the person is allowed to be exactly who they are, they'll show you exactly who they are because there's no consequences. That's why society has built consequences into the ramifications of behavior, because consequences mean that you have to pay for your actions if they're not right. And that shows that we're not evolved enough to actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Because
make those decisions for yourself. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you do have a certain amount of self-awareness, I mean, you naturally become aware of when something doesn't feel right or when something feels right, and especially your own actions.
Yeah.
And that very simple feeling of this doesn't feel right is itself the consequence that keeps you from repeating or doing things of that nature.
Yeah, but also to the it never ends.
Right.
While we're living, it never ends, and when it never ends while we're living, and then we're confronted with something which seems like it never ends. You know, you ever been in a nightmare and wanted to get out and you couldn't get out? It feels like it's forever.
I think so, yeah.
In a lot of ways, Bardo is like that. It will capture you, and then when it captures you, will you become the nightmare, or will you realize the nightmare is not real?
Right. The latter.
Yeah. It's not real. But then you have to get everybody to realize, as a humanity, that the nightmare of communication is not real. It's only a consequence of entanglement. And if you can understand to free yourself from the entanglement, then we can really see what we all need to do, and become a community of utmost high communion.
It's interesting. I mean, I feel like it's very much possible. I know sometimes I feel the opposite of that, but I also look at it like it's easy to think that it's easy to run away from ourselves or what we've done. And I know that a lot of people do that, and I know that I've done that, and I know that I still get challenged to not do that day after day. But it's interesting that there's mental thoughts that, oh, yeah, I just won't acknowledge that, or, oh, like sometimes I'll get a feeling like, did I just do something that wasn't quite right? And I know deep down I could either sit and observe it or bring it forward to be observed between myself and the other person, or I could ignore it and run off with any kind of excuse about it. And I know other people go beyond ignoring things, and they go into distraction, whether they want to distract themselves with TV or food or hanging out somewhere or phone, YouTube videos, video after video of someone else talking about something, rather than self-reflecting on a very simple and maybe brief moment in their day that has the opportunity to help them locate something deeper hidden inside themselves that is of that same frequency, and then go to the source of something that needs to be unrooted, cleansed, taken responsibility for, taken ownership of, as yes, I did that, and I failed to do that, and this is the repercussion of the feeling of regret, or the feeling of lost time, or the feeling of grief, or just feeling so sorry, of pain, because you know that something you did wasn't pure in total lovingness, and therefore it wasn't in total harmony with the deeper part of yourself. So
when you went like this,
yeah,
you went like this, and then you went down to your womb. So you're discussing your heart feelings and your feelings that come from your womb, in terms of the tragedy of that when a woman has tragedy, she'll put one hand on her womb, one hand on her forehead like this, and collapse. So you're going like this. You went down to your womb. There are two feeling centers, very, very major feeling centers inside of your body in terms of your lower dantian. With a woman, she's already automatically got an active womb. This active womb will relate an experience to her every month and change her awareness every month. So then you've got a feeling center that every single month it reminds you of what you're going through, and then it releases you, reminds you of what you're going through, then releases you. So then you've got two feeling centers. So then men have to develop a feeling center as well to have this comparable feeling of entry, or feeling of two locations inside the body. When you come to do White Crane, you're going to be aware of this, because we're going to compress the dantian, and as you compress the dantian, it opens up the reverse cycle. As it opens up a reverse cycle, when you open up your Ming-Men, close your dantian, as you release, the reverse cycle goes from your basic lower center, your sexual center, goes into your lower dantian, and then rises to your heart, and then eventually get to your throat. You'll feel this reverse cycle very, very strong. Women have a very, very strong reverse cycle. This will be a form of cleansing, because what it will do will release what's trapped in your lower feeling center to become looked at from your heart center perspective, from your solar plexus first. It's got to get past your solar plexus, because your solar plexus rolls around into your lower dantian, and then goes to your heart center, and then is given viable means of communication through the throat, through this particular center, so that the true mind is without thought. The true mind is observational in terms of the frequency that you've ensured your body that you understand these particular frequencies. This frequency that shows you that there's a progression or something else other than the mind, other than the emotion. Once you enter into this, and then you you hold this emptiness. Just say I go like this now. Hold a sphere like this. Freeze frame. And then and then you become aware that there's a voluminous emptiness that is your mind navigating something which is very, very subtle, because the feelings inside of your body, there's no entanglements, and you don't have those particular areas of entanglement. So then your mind becomes voluminous. You become aware of the alternate avenues of communication through this higher intelligence. But this higher intelligence is automated, but this automated process will sink into the lower Dante and be freed, go through the heart, through its expression or neurotransmitters of the heart, to actually give you the capacity to speak the neurotransmitters of maybe a resistance from somebody else. And this is the empathic. This is what from the internal world is. We're meant to progressively gravitate towards this empathic nature, is to empty ourselves so that we can accommodate somebody else. As we accommodate somebody else, it goes through our reverse cycle, which is a fire cycle, comes to the heart and out the throat, and then is spoken with someone's truth. And then you're speaking the truth to the other person, but the other person doesn't realize that you captured their feelings because you're no longer there to be captured yourself. So the next level of perception is to capture them. As you capture them, you give voice to what you captured, and then if there's an open-hearted communication, the person will realize, oh, I can't escape this person's awareness because they've captured me. But they haven't captured me to imprison me, they captured me to reflect me back. This is what you've got to come to terms with in terms of the low band pi. You've got to then realize that this open doorways open up very, very quickly with low band pi. And you will navigate this, and as 20 years go by, this will become so refined. And then the altar of your perception is the beauty of your communication to those who don't understand, who didn't really realize that things must be dropped to get to this level of communion. Do you understand? So this type of communion is very, very necessary. It's a state of being of service, but it's a voluminous state that is necessary for us to move into to hold another person's reality within the system of our reception. And as we receive them, we reflect them back. And then when we reflect them back, we realize we don't have a emotional response. We don't have an internal dialogue. We don't hold anything fixed. We generously give back the other person with the love and kindness of our words. But those words have to learn the refinement of communication in terms of the micro gestures of who you're speaking to. So you can speak to their micro gestures, and then you'll see the flares coming out of their eyes, you'll see the flares coming out of their body, and you'll see those flares as you communicate their truth back to them. As you see the flares as a response or reactivity, if you can read those flares, you can read every nuance of their reactivity. Once you speak the nuance of the reactivity, and then you go deeper and deeper into the rabbit hole of communion.
The rabbit hole of communion.
Yeah. Nice little bunny rabbits down there.
Is it all still going towards emptiness or freedom? It's like you share what you know out of love, because you want yourself and everyone else to be free of basically the prison that they can't see that they're in.
And also the prison that develops inside of you if you don't comprehend the projection of that imprisoned consciousness. So when you look at this, you can sit in a cave and absorb and become empty, or you can be a householder, which is way more functional, way more quick in terms of your evolutionary process, because you've got to deal with it very, very quickly, and discover that the reflection back is only your emptiness giving resolve, like death giving resolve to your own circumstance. So then you become you hold death within the emptiness of your communion, and you quicken the other person's path because you've killed everything inside of you. As you kill everything inside of you, it's a positive destructive cycle. You killed your jealousy, you killed your anxiety, you killed your lust, you killed your resentment, you kill everything. That's a positive destructive cycle. But as that destructive cycle becomes empty, you take the destructive cycle of everybody else and reflect it back. So then you're representing emptiness, or the Bardo state. And that's why that forms of service in terms of communication like this have to be revered. And everybody has the capacity to be in this open state of communion. Are you okay?
Yes. I wonder if it's normal for a person who's I think the answer is yes already. But when you're consciously endeavoring to undo these things that you've picked up, you've identified as yourself, but they're really not you. So as you consciously choose to undo these things, is there a certain amount of like physical and emotional, basically vomiting? I remember the first time when I came to do gravity with you in Sedona, sometimes I would feel like I was going to vomit because it was just like a
release.
I don't know. Yeah, like a release. And recently I noticed I've been crying a lot, and it's been a lot of emotional release, but I have to always return to consciously return to a neutrality and observation of it, so that the crying doesn't become an emotional story which could attach to a prior emotional story and just see it as what it is, as a release. And I think that maybe it can be scary for people to choose this consciously, because for the body does experience a kind of death, when you shed even just layers of your identity, not even the whole thing, but just layers of it, like little bits of things. It does feel like a big surrender, a big letting go. And even that phenomenon, I know sometimes before I go to sleep, before I really fall asleep, I'll feel like my body's falling into like a bottomless black space, and I'll go because I'm startled, and I at that moment don't yet trust that it's okay for my body to fall into what feels like a nothingness.
That's beautiful. So you described exactly what you need to do before you go to sleep. But sometimes the full ramifications of nothing to fall into is like falling into the abyss, and you go, and then you come out of the abyss. This is a beautiful experience. If you're crying because something's not resolved, those tears have got to have neurotransmitters of resolve and understanding in them. Or if there's resentment, then there's no change. This has been scientifically proven, don't you?
I don't know that from science, but from experience. Yeah.
So you can look it up on the internet, I'm sure. But no, this is a beautiful experience. That we all have to slowly let go consciously of ourselves, instead of slowly becoming unconscious of ourselves because we didn't let go when we get older.
Right.
You got two choices. Which one do you want?
The first one.
Yeah, that's right. So it's very, very sad to see someone losing their awareness by not admitting anything and going into a childlike state of denial.
Right.
Because whatever's on their face will show exactly what they lived and what they've done. You look at someone who's been devoted in Tibet, you see the wrinkles on their face, but you can see the wrinkles on their face because their environment is very harsh. But you don't see the same sort of wrinkles in a Western person's face. You can see what they've done. You can't see the trials and tribulations of their effort not to do those things. So your trials and tribulations of actually doing the right thing is the best way to die and the best way to live. Yeah. So if there is always a little bit of fear of being revealed, sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
But then
once,
yes.
yeah. But when you overcome this, beautiful. When you overcome this, it's a beautiful thing, you know. So,
Yeah.
do you feel safe with me?
Yeah.
Well, what's wrong with asking other people to feel safe? Say, feel safe with me. I'm not going to do anything wrong. I'm going to be there completely to support you so you feel safe. This is what we need between each other so that your journey of deconstructing your life can be put into an area. Oh, I'm held because I trust. Until you can trust that you don't need to be held because you know what you're looking for. So if you anchor yourself within me for a few years, then you'll realize that the security or the what would you call it, the consistency of my character is never to hurt you, never to betray you, always be truthful to you. Then you'll realize, okay, I'll reverse engineer that onto myself. Never to hurt myself, never to betray myself, and then understand, okay, I have to be this way for other people. And then you become a beacon of light. Mm-hmm. Because you are a beacon of light. Because the only thing that is making you appear is a time-space continuum. It doesn't really exist. Your future, your past is not really there. You're just a reflection of light, which has now given possibilities of its existence. But we really don't exist. And if we really don't exist, then what are we doing here? We're here to be kind to those who don't realize that they don't really exist. But that existence has to be given some verifiable point of reference to relieve it from its condition. Munch.
A verifiable point of reference of non-existence?
Yes. That verifiable point of non-existence will give the capacity for you to speak to someone from that verifiable point of non-existence, because that's where we're going to. Because to get back to where we really meant to be is nowhere, but nowhere has frequencies within it. So if I say, what's in between my hands, you're going to say, nothing. No. But if you do this for a few years, oh, what's that? Then emptiness has reflective points of existence within it, but they're so subtle in comparison to the three-dimensional illusion that we're suffering. So if we can gravitate towards this, then we can gravitate to our higher dimensional platform of non-existence, which means we become luminous. We become balls of light instead of meatballs, of walking meatballs. And we transcend and go into these areas, yeah. And that's where we're really meant to be. It's to find a field of light coming to you and speaking to you. That may be our future coming back and saying, please assist the world in a progressive change towards our future, because our future from a time-space continuum will not exist. We will not exist in luminous form if you don't get your act together in this time-space dimension right now, because we're already there.
Right. But even being there already means that we will, but we still have to.
No. But
Is that true?
Okay, yeah. Now let's take it back. If you don't have a time-space continuum, the time-space continuum is contingent on the space and time that we're existing in. We're coexisting at the same time. So if the coexistence can destroy our future, so our future will maybe come back to remind us that this coexistence, you have to realize this coexistence. How can you realize that? By evolving beyond your physical form into energetic units of information, where we can actually become luminous instead of locked into this frame of reference, which needs to evolve into higher and higher frequencies, where we, what the Tibetans say, you snap into the light body. What's that? That's going into luminous form. Lovely. What do you think we should do now?
Well, I just found where the timestamp is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did you realize my micro gestures there were about time? How did you know that I was saying, well, lovely? It might have been a gesture on my part, but there's the astuteness of your awareness is really there. So you looked at the timestamp. So, I feel this was very obvious, and it was very obvious for you too. But maybe other people didn't find this obvious. So, in your state of communion, I can say that you understood my projection at that particular point.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it interesting?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's simultaneous, because even before I became, it was simultaneous with listening to you, feeling inside myself too of, oh, how long have we been talking for? Are you tired? Is this the appropriate time to stop the conversation? Not just for our physical sake, but for the sake of just having one cohesive video.
Yeah, that's it. Now, so I love everybody. I love you. And this has been a beautiful interview. I'll have you close.
Thank you.
So, Alyssa, you've been so lovely, and this has been very, very enlightening as far as I'm concerned. Yeah.
Especially for me.
Yeah. Well, for me too. For me too.
Well, I guess I'll just sign out, and with that, I'm excited to maybe do another interview with you tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay.
And then if we have it in us, and see where that goes. And thank you for my first ever interview video. I love you so much.
I love you too.
Thank you.
Now, goodbye, everybody. We love you so much. And this has been a very, very beautiful communication with Alyssa, the wonderful, beautiful, shining light.